Move to adjourn.
So I would just like to encourage members of the task force to speak up as they're speaking, and likewise with the audience, we welcome your input, but I'm going to have to ask that you stand and at least either approach the podium or speak in loud voices so that everybody can hear you. So by way of beginning, I'm going to call the meeting of the June 2nd Memorial Boulevard Task Force Committee to order. This is our first official regular meeting. We are now outside of the calendar of special meetings. I am Ellen Zappo. I am the chair, and I represent City Council District 3. I'm going to start on my left and ask the task force members to introduce themselves again.
I'm Cheryl Tebow, task force member, and also from the Board of Finance.
And I'm Bill Soares, task force member.
John Soares, task force member.
Jim Albert, task force member, Chamber of Commerce.
Frank Stosky, task force member for Public Works.
And we are missing tonight Mr. Delmaster, who was unable to make it. So our first order of business is we need to accept our May 15th, 2014 meeting minutes, which were distributed and posted on Agenda Center. Are there any corrections or clarifications to the May 15th meeting minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We've already introduced. All right, so we, at the last meeting, for those of you who are here, I'm just going to give a very brief recap to benefit those who were not here. We did an overview of the draft of the building based on everything that has been suggested over the past several years. Mr. Albert put everything together and did it per the floor plan. So we kind of had an idea about what those preliminary ideas might look like as they were plotted. Did we have too many ideas? Did we not have enough ideas? How did things intersperse? Again, I will say that all of that was preliminary, just looking to see how things fit. At that point, we also circulated a list showing you how he had crafted that with square footage as well as potential income expenses type of breakout. One thing that we've heard very clearly over the past year is that there should be a private-public partnership, and if there was a revenue stream, all the better. So we had those handouts. Some of those, as well as the preliminary timeline that we talked about, are up here as well. From that, we also have that spreadsheet available, which was emailed out to anybody who was here, plus anybody who's expressed interest, plus it was loaded onto the website. So anyone could download and submit their ideas about what they thought should be on that list, or tell us what they thought should not be on that list. And we did receive a fair amount of responses from people with their thoughts and their ideas. So we're going to go through some of that. But at this point, I'm going to open it to the public before we start talking about what we know we've received. Is there anybody here tonight that would like to address us about anything that they've seen at the previous meetings or anything that they've been thinking about that they've not had yet the opportunity to express to us? Sean?
I know I missed the last meeting, so do I have to say my name?
Just your address.
53 Lancaster Road.
Excuse me.
I'm going to use the microphone anyway. Just.
Could they stand here and sort of face both groups?
Yeah, it might be better if you come to an angle so that everybody can hear
That
you,
way,
not just
public can hear it too. You know,
Okay.
right about there would be good.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just have the same concern that I had before about the viability of the funding and the economic sustainability aspect of the theater, because everywhere I look, it's going to require subsidies and it's going to require a significant amount of fundraising. When I spoke about that previously, somebody had interrupted me to tell me that it was supported by blue-collar community, when in fact the Niagara Falls Cultural Arts Center is actually part of the Cultural Tourism Initiative. So it is getting some of its funding from people that are going to that location to see other things, and people that are on vacation and whatnot. So I think we're kind of looking at apples and oranges here when we look at the Niagara Falls Cultural Arts Center in regards to the school. And I'm not saying it's not worth looking at, but I think we need to look harder at the numbers. I didn't get to look over the paperwork that was right here yet before I put this stuff together, but I'm just looking at a timeline from different things that I found on the internet. From 2006, there was some concern about, I guess the city lost state grants at over $400,000, which were slated for certain improvements. Among those, there was going to be $500,000 that went to the Niagara Cultural Arts Center, which is going to be a 2-year match from the city, and that faded away. And then if you look further, you see in 2013, a nonprofit offered to put up money, but they only were offering it if the city matched it. And I think that's significant too. I mean, we can't move forward with this and say it's not going to be a burden to the taxpayers if we don't know exactly where we stand in it. And I don't know how we can have a fair comparison, but I think Niagara Falls is very far away, and we need to look, locally for a comparison. Also, another thing that I saw, they're going to renovate the theater now. They're talking about doing some more bonding again.
Who's they? Is it still Niagara?
Niagara, yep. That's all that I looked up, and it was just, I didn't realize we were having a meeting tonight until earlier today, so I tried to look up a little bit of independent information, but it looks like between $2.5 and $3 million for the renovation of the theater in Niagara. Now, I don't know where we stand over here in Bristol. Somebody mentioned $14 million. I think that's a staggering figure. So I don't know how we can present this to taxpayers where they're going to be on board with it. But obviously not everybody in the city is here tonight. So I'd like to see some transparency and some options for people that aren't participating tonight, people that are going to be financially responsible for it, but don't want to be part of the planning process, if possible.
And it is possible, and we have a website section where anything that we discuss here has been loaded on. So the surveys and all of that is on there.
Well, that would
all the
be
information.
That would be helpful for someone who wants to know what's going on in the planning process, but for someone who wants to have a decision on what happens with the fate of the building and whether or not they're going to be financially, on the hook for that, I think that should be left in the hands of the taxpayers, not on a group of 50 people. That's just my personal conviction. Thank you for your time.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak at this point? Although anybody can speak as we go through the various sections, but at this point for presentation of new ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, Cheryl Barb, 52 Belladine Gardens Drive. I just happened to be looking through my notes, Ellen, and when I met with Mrs. Ono over the historic preservation issues that we were dealing with, she had mentioned to me that Old Saybrook had gone through a school conversion. Old Saybrook had gone through a school conversion. I haven't for common use, for use. And that, you were looking at Niagara Falls. If you were looking for a case in Connecticut that did a school conversion, Old Saybrook would be the town to look at. And I think they did historic preservation components to that. And one thing that my husband had suggested to me, so I think I should bring this forward, we were talking about theater uses and the importance of having appropriate parking. At the site, and there was some discussion about using the ball field for that issue, and people were battering that back and forth. He had suggested that you have 2.3 miles of roadway, and we've often closed the boulevard for special events. We use it as a town square. Maybe what we should be looking for is when we do these special events, closing the roadway, but there are 2 roads that go around. Traffic could be converted, and on those evenings where we are using the facility, you have 1 lane going this way and 1 lane going that way. It's like a perfect parking lot. Save money. It's just a suggestion. I hadn't thought of it, but he did. So I don't know the rules about closing the road or anything like that, but you guys know that.
Can I ask a question? What year was the Old Saybrook conversion? Do you know what year that took place? Was it recent, like in the last 5 years?
I think it was in the last few years. Ma'am, I really don't know. I was in another discussion, and so I didn't really pursue that.
Okay.
That was mentioned to me. So I guess the people to contact would be Old Saybrook, or maybe if they had used preservation monies to help affect that for the conversion to an old school, maybe the historic...
We can track it down.
Track it down, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else at the preliminary part? Okay. So the next item that we are going to talk about is reviewing the new suggestions that have been received in the discussions from last meeting and anything that's transpired since. I'm going to first ask Commissioner Albert if he has anything that he'd like to open with, because he's the one tracking some of those end-use proposals. I sent you the few that I've received, communication-wise, to be made part of the record, and any other comments that you have about the work you've been doing, we can start with that.
Okay, I apologize we don't have them up on the screen, but there are handouts. If you haven't gotten one, I suggest you pick one up here on the table. Andy, you just came in, you might want to grab one. These are slides, some of the slides we showed at the last meeting that show floor plans of the building. We are in what I consider the visioning phase, which is where we're trying to envision what could go and where would go inside the building, and then just roughly how much revenue or cost would be associated with those uses. So as Ellen said, we're accepting all ideas without prejudice. So I'm hoping that some of you all had taken the homework assignment from the last meeting, which was this spreadsheet, which showed the uses that we talked about at the last meeting. I know, Sean, you weren't here, but it's in the packet.
Yep, thank you.
My guess is as to the estimated revenue of that, how much square footage could be allocated to those uses, and then there was a lot of space at the bottom here for additional ideas that we could talk about. The building in general is 4 floor stories, 3 above ground and 1 ground level. There's actually a lower level even beyond that, but it's generally related to the systems of the building, so it's not really usable for any human purposes. If you're a furnace, that would be a good place for you to live. But anyway, so I'm really looking at 4 floors. Each floor is roughly 25,000 square feet. Total building is about 100,000 square feet, of which some of that is infrastructure and hallways, so you're really looking at about 65,000 to 70,000 square feet of usable space. The floors are pretty much similar in pattern. The ground floor is the one that's a little bit different in that it has locker rooms and a lot of little catacomb kind of rooms. So you end up going down hallways that kind of lead you to dead ends and have to turn around. So it's not as easy of a pattern as the upper floors. We did talk about a number of the potential uses. They're all on the spreadsheet again. At our last meeting, I don't necessarily want to go through all of those again. What I wanted to do, I did receive a number of ideas, one of which was brought to my attention that I provided as a handout tonight. So if you look in your package, I know you don't have nice colored versions of this because frankly I'm not using up my color ink that much, but I will post this on our website. The idea actually came from Dr. Ellen Solik, who's the superintendent of schools, as well as Marie O'Brien, who's the chairman of the board of Bristol Hospital. And it goes along with some of the discussion we had at our last meeting, and it goes across the vein of the idea that the Memorial Boulevard School, or the Veterans Memorial Boulevard School, should be a destination. We had discussions, and I've had discussions since the last meeting with various people about turning the building over for additional government use. In other words, moving parts of City Hall or all of City Hall to it, moving some of the city departments to it, some combination of the two. It's certainly an option. There was a study, Sean didn't bring it up, but there was a study earlier done of the cost of potentially moving City Hall to Memorial Boulevard building, and I think it came in the neighborhood of about $20 million. So again, in your vein of affordable and reasonable, that might not be something that the public would be all that amenable to, But there have been a number of people who say that that's what, if they had to vote, that's what they would vote on, is Memorial Boulevard School looks like a great city hall, let's consider moving City Hall to it. The other downside to that idea is, what do we do with this building?
Right.
And the general cynical approach to that is bulldoze it, there's no other good use for it. But that's certainly not something we want to continue adding more and more dirt to a downtown like this. Anyway, I think that the discussion should center around making Memorial Boulevard School a destination. What we want it to be, I think with the vision and the general conversation, was around making it sort of the cultural or heritage heart of the city that draws people to want to come to it, both internally, citizens of the city, as well as externally, people visiting the city would be drawn to downtown, and the Memorial Boulevard School could be the epicenter of that draw. Not necessarily everything, but you want to get people to come downtown, and not necessarily come downtown just to get a fishing permit and then go back home. You want them to come downtown and then also stop and eat, or also stop and have a drink, or go see a movie, or whatever, or shop, or whatever. So I think if we move in that direction, it's probably going to make it easier time of putting together a plan that would be affordable and reasonable to the citizenry of Bristol. But when it's open discussion, again, please, if you're hell-bent on pushing the idea of moving City Hall, I encourage you to say that, because it's still on the table and it will be brought up as a potential for the school. But in my mind, the numbers don't work well when you go in that direction. It doesn't also help the city in an economic way from a business perspective. But anyway, Dr. Solik and Marie O'Brien had put together a few pages of notes as a what-if vision of what they see as the heart of Memorial Boulevard, or what we need to refer to as Veterans Memorial Boulevard, because that's its official name. We tend to drop the word veterans, but it is a Veterans Memorial Boulevard, and it is a Veterans Memorial Boulevard School, which was deeded to the city by Albert Rockwell, by the way, in the 1920s. 12 acres was deeded to the city for an educational purpose, but also for the purpose of memorializing the city's veterans community and the sacrifices made by city citizens for the good of the city. So anyway, so their vision of Veterans Memorial Boulevard would be to make it the National Armed Forces Center. And when they did some research on it, and unfortunately Dr. Sola couldn't be here tonight, but she would love to come to a future meeting and express this in her own way. There is no particular venue currently anywhere in the United States that is a all-service armed forces memorial museum of any kind. Everybody has particular, whether it be an Air Force museum or an Army museum or whatever, but there isn't anything right now in the form of a national all-services venue. So they say, let's review that potential. And they call it the National Armed Forces Center. From a fundraising perspective and from a political perspective, this type of thing would naturally lend itself towards political support at all levels, whether it be the city, the state, the federal level. I can't imagine in my wildest dreams any politician objecting to supporting a veterans-themed venue in the heart of Bristol, Connecticut, and serving as a draw. If you imagine signs on the highways, 84 and wherever, explaining that this is the exit for not only Lake Compounds, but also the exit, or for ESPN, but also the exit for the National Armed Forces Memorial Center. And then they go into the different types of things, and these are some of the things we talked about last week, so there's a lot of overlap. I'd say at least 50% of this is an overlap. They extended their thoughts out to the grounds and would envision the grounds being also potentially a walking museum of military and veterans-related artifacts, whether they be weaponry or places where there would be reenactments or some sort of educational activities, vehicles, uniforms, you name it. They're looking at this being both internal and external to the building. They're looking at using the amphitheater, the theater that we talked about last meeting at length, and bringing that to life and putting it under the umbrella. You talked earlier, Sean, about the sustainability or viability of a theater. From an artistic point of view, the numbers don't necessarily allow for financial sustainability of that type of a venue. And many, if not most, of the theaters in the area are in constant struggle over survival because there are just so many acts that you can have, and it makes it difficult to find enough of them that bring enough people to make it sustainable. But in this particular vision, the theater would be part of the Veterans Armed Forces Center and therefore would be funded via multiple sources, primarily through veterans organizations in the federal government and the state government, possibly the city, but mostly federal and state, to include the theater and all the operations of the theater. This would not mean that the theater would be dedicated solely to the veterans' use, but it would also be available to public use, as we spoke about last time. As we spoke last time, the amount of uses of that theater would be relatively limited to a few a month. And this type of a thing would not interfere necessarily with the public also being able to host school plays or any kind of musical venues or concerts and other things that would go along. It just throws it into the umbrella of it's also useful for military movies, for guest speakers, and the like. And there's a little write-up that they put in here about their thoughts about the theater that would go there. As far as internal to the building, we had talked briefly, but didn't pursue the idea last time of a rehabilitation or some sort of medical use of the building at the last meeting we had. Since then, Marie and some of the Bristol hospital people have discussed the potential for using part of the building as a veterans, again, related rehabilitation and healing center. The part of the building that would lend itself most quickly to that would be the lower level, the ground floor, where the gymnasium and the pool area is, and the areas around the cafeteria and in that grouping. It certainly would require some adjustment of the building to be able to do all that, but that's kind of where the vision of that would be. This type of thing would also be open to the public on a space available basis. They're also looking at using parts of the building for education and training and employment around the, again, themes of veterans. And we had talked at the last meeting about encouraging a college or some sort of educational institution to move to, I believe it was the second floor, south wing of the building. This would be, again, similar to that concept, only to be centered around training and education of things like manufacturing, industry, the trades, and other types of what I call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics related career paths, specifically designed around veterans, but I could see it also extending out to other demographics as well. But we do have a problem. This is one of the politically sensitive issues in Washington, D.C., is the United States is worried right now, the government is worried about what to do with 1 million returning vets over the next few years, and where are they going to get trained, where are they going to get employed, and all of that, housing, education, healthcare, etc. This would be part of that solution set for our region, turning it into an armed forces employment and education center. And that's their general big topic. They would also think, by the way, that veterans-related organizations, we talked about this at the last meeting too, could move into that building. This would include the recruitment center across the street, the Army Strong office, a new Veterans Chamber of Commerce that's beginning to be formed here in the state of Connecticut, possibly an office for the Veterans Council, and other veterans-related organizations could kind of all be housed in that building as well. I haven't done the math and the floor plans that you see in your packet to see, like, does that use up the whole building? Are we done? I suspect that even in all of this, there's still plenty of room for other things in the building. One of the things that they mentioned in here is if we do provide all of these types of things, including especially the rehab facility sponsored by Bristol Hospital, that we could encourage the development of a hotel downtown to support that type of environment. It reminds me of somewhat like a Ronald McDonald House, or there is another organization in the veterans community that puts these homes or hotel-like facilities near VA hospitals where the families of these people could stay while their loved ones are being treated in the local facility. So their vision is that by doing this, it would also encourage areas like Depot Square or some of the empty buildings in downtown to be converted to temporary hotel or residential. Could be a residential facility that rents by the week or whatever the case may be. So anyway, so that's their thoughts on what to do. If we were to envision the building around the theme of Veterans Memorial Boulevard and making it a true veterans-related facility, both from a visitor center, from a museum point of view, from a business office point of view, from an education point of view, from an employment services point of view, rehab, entertainment, et cetera, et cetera. And I just brought it to your attention because that was probably the idea that was the most developed since our last meeting by two extremely well-spoken women here in town.
So that, you do have that electronically?
I do have it electronically.
Okay, so we will add that to the list of resources that is on the Memorial Boulevard School Task Force, so that especially members of the task force who are hearing this for the first time, as well as anyone who's interested in reading about that concept that's just been proposed, will have the opportunity to do so. Following up on some other aspects of what we had talked about at our last meeting, the museum piece. We did receive an email dated May 29th from the interim administrator director of the American Clock and Watch Museum, addressed to me. And the email is informing me that the Bristol Museum Collaborative, which is comprised of representatives from all the museums, met on Tuesday this week and discussed the possibility of museums at Memorial Boulevard School. Please note that Tom Dickow from the Historical Society was not present. Those that were present were unanimous in the sense that, okay, it's cut off, that there is no need to start a new museum in Bristol when the community can already support those that are here. We believe that a visitor center directing people to all of the resources is a good idea, and that we would be willing to support some minimal presentation to attract them to our facilities. Please let me know if you need to discuss this further. Don Muller, Interim Administrator. So that was part of our discussion last month, and I think that we all agreed that a jumping off point to bring people to our other museums is a good function there. We also received an email today. This is copies of past communications from Eileen McNulty to various building committees concerning youth services activities and their space utilization needs. So that has been received, and there's various build-outs of what they envision and what they've been asked for in the past. I also pulled from the city budget the adult education funding sources, and they do pay a certain amount in rent for their current location on Redstone Hill. That was another part of the whole education and training piece that we talked about in terms of an idea that might work well there. So this will be added as well. Obviously, this is their budget through last year, so things could change, but they do in fact spend about $40,000 in rent on Redstone Hill Road. So that's all that I've received. Has anybody else up here on the task force received anything formally or informally from members of the public relating to the survey? Bill, did you want to talk about any of the things that you had talked about in your email? Some of your questions?
I forgot what they were.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Did you get my email?
Yes, I sent them. Did you get in?
That was the informal group that got together.
Yeah.
Would you like to express that to the group?
Oh, is this about the theater?
It was
Mostly
multiple uses.
Okay, all right.
And I actually, I don't have it in front of me. Rich was part of that group, I think Dave. There was a bunch of us that met informally last year when this whole process started. with what we were going to do with the Memorial Boulevard School. And some of the pieces were taken from when Mike McCastro was at the Chamber, but we also got together and we came up with a bunch of other uses. One was, I think, an indoor playground down in the gymnasium where kind of like the jumpin' jammin' thing is in Forestville. You'd have something like that that would generate income. And I don't remember everything else out.
I have it.
But I sent it to you. And Jesse Gallagher, Mike Siri were in that group and kind of figured out like costs for different things. The theater would be used for like movies as well as performances. One of the things that we talked about, I know that's really big right now, is the trampolines. I think they just opened one in New Britain. So those are some of the thoughts that we spoke about. I think the incubator businesses, whether it was the tech stuff as well as the arts. If somebody wanted to do, like right now, Dancing with the Stars, the big thing is Fred Astaire with the, or not Fred Astaire, whatever it is, the dancing. Yeah, thank you. If somebody wanted to do that, they could have a classroom and it would be at a minimal cost where people could come and do things like that, and you're not spending the big bucks going into West Hartford. So those are ideas. I think I gave you a whole list.
Okay, and I'm just going to briefly summarize Andrea's email because I didn't print it and neither did Jim. So it starts with a multi-use community facility and there's subheadings under it: the business and arts incubator space, the indoor playground and gymnasium, potential party rooms, the theater they scored high. City retains ownership of the property, continues to maintain the building, provide utilities, playing fields maintained, and then there was the potential for classroom rentals and revenue from such. They are estimating between 30 and 35 rooms could be used, and that those could be charged rent so that there could be an annual rental revenue based on full occupancy that could yield up to between $10,000 if it was monthly, or if it was fully rented at those rates, almost $120 annually. There could be revenue from the indoor playground if there was a projected admission price of $6 per child, so that could come in, and that there could be annual revenue from indoor play centers as well. And then the revenue from theater events, they provided a subgroup of that if they were projecting for musical entertainment, that there could be revenue from 5 major concerts. There could be family film matinees, Saturday, Sunday, and midweek. Projecting weekly attendance at 250 with $3 per ticket, that could yield almost $3,000 monthly in revenue. They suggested foreign art films, and then there's then they also included a list of some of the potential uses for those classroom rentals that I've already mentioned. Incubator businesses, per the Chamber proposal, visual artists, artisans, screen printing, photographers, music lessons, conference rooms, used or niche toy store, textile artists, sculpture studios, preschool childcare, small-scale museum space. So this was submitted, and Andrea, could you just tell me again who else was in your group? Rich, Mike Siri?
Rich, Dave Mills was there, Jesse Gallagher, Mike Siri. That was the one in the summer we met.
Okay, I mean, I just want to make sure I keep it straight.
I don't remember who else.
No, that's great. So we'll put this in as
Michelle
well and
Boyko.
circulate it.
Kim Valente was there.
Okay, thank you.
I remember.
You remembered. Okay, so that is another set of the survey responses that we asked for. Bill?
Yeah. 2 things. You talk about the theater, and unfortunately, a big number gets thrown out, about $14 million. And where that came from was when we first started looking at developing Depot Square, we asked the state if we might get some help. And they put some money on the table, and we had someone do an evaluation or a plan for the theater. And they came back with that big number, $14, $15 million. But that was totally out of whack. That included knocking a couple of walls down, making the stage twice as big, was totally unrealistic and never really considered. So don't let that big number scare you as far as any theater renovation. One of the other ideas I had mentioned to Ellen was a room literally for each of the wars where we'd have memorabilia from each of the wars, starting with the Civil War, Spanish American, World War I, World War II, right on all the way up through the wars in the Mideast. And that would tie in with the idea of attracting people and attracting tourists literally to Bristol, as well as educational for students, not only in Bristol, but surrounding towns would come in to learn about it as a possible idea.
Thank you. Okay, so I think, yes,
I just have a question.
I've been loud.
Hi, Lisa Freeman, 55 Birch Street. I'm wondering, 'cause I'm not from Bristol originally, you can probably tell from the accent. And so my question is two different things. Has anyone looked into what a museum like this, what kind of tourist draw that will bring? If they have, I'd love to see those numbers. If not, it's projected, and who knows. I personally, I'm a former Army wife. But I could care less to go see things about wars. It's just not my thing. On the other hand, where I grew up, we had a rec center that had painting classes and, gymnastics for kids and ballet, and we had, whatever your kids wanted to get into. We could build a pool. I mean, there's one down in the basement, supposedly, but there's plenty of room. If we wanted to build a big pool to do swim meets and whatever, there's room for that. And I just kind of feel like there's so much potential with that building. And I'm not saying we don't do the VA thing. I think that with the amount of people coming back from the war, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to those people to give them a place where they can go and have the rehab that they need, or have the resources that they need to get back into our community. And I absolutely agree with that. But I also feel like we have a responsibility to our community itself to give kids a place to go, and to give adults a place to go. To get a sandwich downtown, to see a film, yes, to see a ballet, to see whatever, to take a class on computers, to do a pottery class, whatever it is. There's so much that this building has, and to kind of keep it in like a narrow little box, I think is missing the opportunity that it has, because that building is huge. You can do so much with it.
And that's why we're visioning, because there is such potential there. So as I said at the last meeting, this is not the list. This is not what's happening. This is the very preliminary visioning piece so that we can get everybody's feedback on what we're doing and what they think. From that, we are going to establish a path midsummer through the end of this year to come up with a proposal that the community is going to need to embrace, and that there will be fundraising and all types of budgeting issues attached to that. And that's what we're doing right now. I just get really nervous when people hear great ideas like what Jim just presented on behalf of Dr. Solik and Roy O'Brien and think, oh, that's what they're doing. That's not what we're doing. That's a great proposal. Bill had great ideas. We've had great ideas from the audience. It's not over, but this is the piece. And I think that if that message gets lost, then honestly this project could be doomed before it starts. So I'm just going to keep repeating myself until you're all throwing things at me. But we have to be very clear that visioning comes first. We've gathered all this data from the last 3 to 4 years since the school's closed. It's all on the website. I will personally throw something myself at anybody who says, I don't know what's going on, because that is not the correct answer tonight. We have just volumes of material that we've accumulated from all these different sources, from the Board of Ed, from the Public Works Department, from the contractors who have worked on the building, and we'll hear about that from Frank. So again, open minds, lots of dialogue, and then we're going to narrow. And everyone's going to have an opportunity to do that and listen. But I just encourage everyone to listen to the ideas, because I do think that there's some interesting melding of uses here. And you're right, it's a very large space. But let's make sure that we get everybody's feedback, because from that feedback is going to come community buy-in, and we're not going to have one without the other. Okay, so Sean and then Cheryl. Sean?
Have we established what kind of process we're going to use to determine what the end use is going to be when it comes to the time to narrow that down? How are we going to determine what the consensus is, or what would be the best use for it? How are we going to establish that?
I don't think we have formally, but I think the process that Jim started last meeting, where we had everything up and we looked at financial, we looked at space, we looked at, what were the other, you had a bunch of criteria.
Cost, revenue,
Space
space.
needs, parking considerations. I mean, there was a lot. And actually, we also talked about people
And things
who...
that need the building to be renovated in different
Right.
ways that would be on the board.
Yeah. So we had a basic framework, and so
So
as
you're gonna-
he used as his example, the City Hall thing is probably not going to work based on the fact that it really doesn't fit any of those criteria right
So we're
now.
basically just trying to rule out things that aren't feasible, but then
We're using a very big comb at this point
Yeah.
and not defining.
well, what happens when we get to that point where, all right, well, we can do A, B, C, or D? How are we going to determine, get from here to there? Is it going to be the members of the task force going to vote on it, or
Yeah, the process would be, at this point, that this task force would take everything that they've done, the body of work, over however many months that ends up being, that we then would have the discussion as a task force, and we would have to endorse a recommendation that would go to the mayor and the city council. And at that point, the mayor and city council have the opportunity to do a variety of things. It could go on the proverbial shelf with all the other decades' worth of reports. It could be funded. It could be referred out to various commissions and committees. It would definitely need to go back to the Planning Commission for a Section 8-24 referral. There's a lot of things that have to happen. Our whole goal here is to catch the wave of that and not be delayed another year if there is the potential for funding, because the budget process starts in December for the next fiscal year.
Gotcha.
So the more information we amass that we can then push out to the other entities that have to have a role, the better off we're going to be. So that's a little bit of an accountability and transparency and having that big picture.
Okay, thank you.
I was just, you touched on a little bit, and I know Jim did a spreadsheet, but what's critical is when Lisa was talking about how many people would come, when we have all the ideas, each one will need to be financially modeled out. So we'd have to come up with data of how many people we feel would come to this museum, and what kind of entrance fee could there be, and so forth. How would it, the enhancements to the building. So, I mean, all of these ideas will eventually turn into spreadsheets and financial models, which also is a piece we need to do. So, but until everybody brainstorms, as Ellen said, and we want to hear every idea, we can't totally financially model. But one of the things that's important to me on this committee is that whatever use we have, it covers the cost of operation, and ultimately the remodeling is either coming in through grants or funds or donations or averaged or leveraged over a number of years so that it's sustainable. And I think everybody on the committee shares that. And so, Lisa, when you say you don't know how many people would come, that is one of the things we'd have to consider as we model, and anybody else who has those concerns.
And it's estimated the cost to run the building would be around $180,000 to $200,000 a year, roughly, with utilities, etc.
There is a couple aspects of the cost analysis. One of them obviously is rental, possible rental. The other one is cost avoidance, where we put something there, as Ellen indicated, where the Board of Ed is now paying money outside. We could avoid that expense. And the third is very subtle, but by bringing people to town for activities in that building, we will provide a benefit to many of the businesses in town also. That's somewhat subjective, hard to quantify, but that's part of the thought process.
anything else from a visioning, preliminary idea standpoint? So we do have a few other things to talk about within the realm of this topic. From a accountability standpoint, I do want to report that at our last meeting, we did talk about sending out informal invitations and or letting people know that their entity has been discussed as a potential end user. Again, in the interest of not having a department head say, well, that's news to me, I never heard that. We did outreach to the park department. We had a board meeting 2 weeks ago that I attended, and they have referred it to a committee to start talking about potential end-use ideas. It was also, the Youth Services Board was notified, and I don't know if you've had a meeting yet, but Eileen McNulty is here, and she has submitted some of the documentation that she had put together previously when this topic was hot. The Chamber of Commerce received a letter just in order to keep them formally in the process. There is a Veterans Council meeting Wednesday at 7 o'clock in that room over there, which I will be attending and speaking to them under public participation about the fact that we would love to have them be a centerpiece of keeping the building up in front and open and have people be there in terms of if they could do anything in November with the Veterans Day activities. So that's on Wednesday. The Board of Ed has moved their meeting to next Wednesday, and I actually was remiss in mentioning them in my list last month, so I had not sent that letter because I really did not have authority to do so. It was not one of the entities that we had discussed. So if the board was so inclined, I could increase that list and send a communication for them, and luckily, because they did move their meeting, there may be an opportunity for them to receive it and place it on their agenda and or refer for their, what would be their June 11th meeting.
On a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that Chairman Zappel be authorized to communicate with the Board of Ed as he has been with departments.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm also taking minutes, so bear with me.
Multitasking.
Just for clarification, what the point it would be to discuss with them?
That their department has been mentioned in several community meetings about having a potential end use, whether it be adult education or other types of educational opportunities, for them to be informed so that they're not going to read it in the paper tomorrow and be involved in that process.
I did broach that subject with Dr. Solik today.
Excellent. Okay, so at least she'll be aware. But that letter was not sent in May, so it will now be sent this week. Other just quick catch up on housekeeping items is Cheryl Barb, who is here as part of our Historic Resources Subcommittee, did complete the Historic Resources Inventory request to be considered. That went to the State of Connecticut Historic Preservation Council, so I'd like to thank her on behalf of the committee. That was an awesome amount of work. It included an application, a lot of historical documentation, photos, and I have a complete set for the record here that we have not heard back from the state, but apparently, you know, in the review process, if they do have questions and when it's time for them to entertain this, we will hear from them. So that is another item checked off of the task list. For those of you who weren't here, you will understand that this is important because as much as we have two registered districts surrounding the boulevard itself was not listed. And that, if a building is listed either independently or as a contributing structure, it opens up a door to a variety of funding resources. So it's important for us to, if we are going to take advantage of some of that grant funding, that we have that building listed. The last piece that I wanted to talk about was Bill's list that he's already covered. Last meeting, we also had a group here who were enthusiastic and specific about the theater use, and Kim Valente offered to coordinate that group. So I don't know if you'd like to speak and give us a little bit of an update if anything's transpired in 2 weeks, or if you have a need to meet again, because we can do that at the end of the meeting like we did last month, because I don't think it won't be as long as it was for those of you who were here for our marathon meeting at the last time, where it was almost 3 hours. We did get a lot done. We will not be here tonight for 3 hours. So Kim, it's up to you if you'd like to update us, or just wait until you meet again. Either way, you'll have an opportunity to speak, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, there's not a lot to update as of right now because
what I was hoping to do tonight with whoever's here on the theater group would be to, as a group, formulate questions that we then pose to some of the contacts that we want to make and ask questions about what they did with their theaters. And we have some of those contacts, but it's not worth talking to them until we have formulated our list of questions. And so I was hoping, yes, that whoever's here tonight, that we could sit down and just, as a group, come up with some questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think the things that I needed to cover tonight, as well as what we had hoped to do, is I think going to leave us some time. So if we could just get through some of the other quick business items, we can do that. The theater subgroup will meet tonight for that purpose. The historic resources subgroup, Cheryl did all this work. There's really nothing to do with that right now, except it's a waiting game. I have the application right here if anybody would like to thumb through it just to get a feel of what that meant to do. Feel free to do so as the subgroups meet, but this is our only copy, so please don't walk away with any sections of it. So the next subgroup is the facilities subgroup. And Frank, I know you had some things in the hopper between the last meeting and now. Now would be a good time for you to fill us in on those.
Okay, before I start though, I'd like to caution people regarding getting hung up on costs. What is it going to cost to repair or fix this building? It's going to cost money. The number is going to be fairly large, I'm sure, based on all the things we've worked on so far. However, we really can't determine with any amount of accuracy what the cost is going to be until we decide how we want to use the building, because that's going to determine how systems are going to have to be changed, modified, upgraded, and everything else. So that to sort of go off now and say, well, it's going to cost $20 million or $50 million or $10 million. It's really just spinning our wheels, wasting our time, and getting a lot of people upset and frustrated. So if we could just sort of put dollars aside until we make some progress, and we're going to have a true, real, official engineering study of the building based on its intended usage. And that's not going to happen for months from now. But with that, John Smith, Charlie Freeman, Peter Fusco, and myself took a real long study of the systems. We know what we have. We know that the city is going to have to put some extra effort into maintaining the building as it stands right now. Right now, they're sort of in a mode of just holding it together, heating it so nothing freezes, but beyond that, not much other types of work. So we're going to go looking to see that, Board of Public Works, which now maintains the building, looks after some other issues more closely.
Okay.
But beyond that, Board of Public Works, you know that they've been working on cleaning. They've really done a lot of work in there. If you go in there today, tomorrow, this afternoon, I mean, it really looks good.
Okay, so just pause there for a minute. Those of you who have been here and who went on the tour know that there's a lot of stuff left in the building. So we had talked a lot about what to do with that. So what the Public Works Department has been doing in the last 6 weeks is when there's a rainy day and certain crews can't go out because of materials and equipment, they've been sending them to the boulevard. They're cleaning. And then the last phase will be bringing everything down to the first level. And at that point, Purchasing Department and the Public Works Department is going to make a decision about, do we tag sale, do we try a mini auction, what are we doing, are we going to scrap for metal salvage, everything that's left. But everything at that point will be on that first level, and all of the detritus of everything that we don't need will be removed from the building, which goes a long way toward helping us get to that next level of figuring out the use. So thank you for following up on that.
And probably the last thing, last time, of course, I did make contact with the building officials and not an opinion. Of course, just as importantly is the fire marshal. I've been in contact with the fire marshal. He's had some vacation time on everybody. Promised he will get back to me with a written statement this week. So once I get that, I'll forward that.
Are there any questions from anyone here concerning the facilities component and the mechanicals that Frank is overseeing in his committee at this point? Tom?
Tom Doyle, 128 High Street. When I went through a tour of the building, the one thing that stood out for me in the theater was that there had been some roof leaks. I've seen some other old theaters before where once the roof starts leaking, I mean, the cost gets really prohibitive. Has anybody been up on the roof to actually just go over and patch things so we can get through this year until funding comes in?
Well, our group, we were in fact on the roof. But prior to that, the roof wasn't leaking. It is not leaking. The roof is very sound. But what was leaking, the air handling equipment up on top of the roof, which has nothing to do with the roof, but water was migrating into one of the air handlers and running down and, yes, onto the ceiling. That has been repaired.
Oh, great. That's great.
But those are the kinds of things I was talking about in terms of Public Works having to pay more attention to that building than they had planned.
Good news.
Thanks.
Okay.
I have
All
a
right.
question on the facilities. Frank, in our discussion,
Dave, you can't hear me?
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Even if you stand up from your space, that's good.
we spoke briefly about the fencing outside and some of the aesthetic things about the building. And you said you contacted somebody and talked about that. In other words, what can be done by the public, if anything, to enhance the look of the building? You want to just talk a little bit about that, or is that preliminary?
Right. I mean, the question is what can be done by the public? And what Dave is alluding to, one of the things is that there are metal fencing, metal bars, which unfortunately have not been cared for in quite a few years. Therefore, there's a lot of rust. However, they're quite sound. A steel brush taking off most of the debris and a coat of primer and paint would do a significant amount to beautify this building. But then the question he talked about was, well, can the public get involved? Can we get a Boy Scout troop to go in there and do some work? So that's sort of under investigation because liability becomes a very large concern. For the most part, the city, as I understand it, is self-insured. So, unfortunately, we have to get the lawyers involved, or we will get them involved. But certainly, one of the thoughts is to get the public. I mean, not only Boy Scout troops who tend to be looking for things, but what we were finding are individual citizens